I never thought that my marriage to Melanie would reach a point where we would be looking for ways to rekindle the spark. We always seemed like the kind of couple that stuck together against all odds. But years of routine, endless workdays, and everyday worries gradually made us strangers. I could see it in her eyes. She no longer looked at me the way she used to. And it hurt. When she suggested going to an adult camp, I was skeptical at first. Camp? For us? Are you serious? I asked when she first mentioned it at dinner. But her voice was full of enthusiasm. It's not just a camp, Tom. It's a place where couples reconnect, work on themselves, and discover something new. It might be just what we need. I wasn't convinced, but for her sake I agreed. If she really thought it would help, why not try it? Besides, I felt I had to do something to save our relationship. The camp was located a few hours away from our city, in a beautiful forest overlooking a lake. When we arrived, I immediately noticed how organized everything was. Spacious cottages, perfectly groomed paths, common areas for recreation. Everything looked like an advertisement from a travel magazine. The staff greeted us with smiles, and there was an atmosphere of relaxation in the air. At first glance, the place seemed too perfect for me. Melanie, on the other hand, was delighted. Her eyes were shining like a child in an amusement park. She took my hand and said, "Tom, I'm sure things are going to change here." The first day was quite uneventful. We listened to an introductory lecture on the importance of reconnecting and participated in several team-building exercises. The instructor seemed very friendly, especially one of them, Dan. He was tall, muscular, with a confident look and that charisma that you can't help but notice. He was someone who knew how to hold attention, and most of the women in the group seemed to admire him. Melanie did too. I could see it. She was laughing at his jokes, her eyes literally shining as he explained the next exercise. I tried to convince myself that it was just my jealous brain exaggerating. She's here for us, I kept telling myself. For our marriage. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Group games, walks in the woods, evenings around the campfire. Melanie seemed to really enjoy it all, but I began to notice little things that worried me. She began to spend more time outside of our sessions together, justifying it by saying that she was participating in additional sessions. "It will help me understand myself better," she said one evening when I asked her why she missed our assignments together. I tried not to doubt her words, but my inner voice screamed that something was wrong. One evening, after another day of activities, I decided to take a walk around the camp. Melanie said she was going to a special lecture for women, and I decided to spend some time alone. The walk led me to the central pavilion, where the windows were still lit. I looked inside and saw a group of people sitting in a circle. Dan was standing in the center, and Melanie was sitting next to him, listening intently to his every word. Her expression was something I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine interest, admiration, and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. I felt my chest begin to tighten. I walked back to our cottage, trying to figure out if I was exaggerating or if there really was something between them. The next morning I tried to talk to her. "Melanie, do you really think these extra sessions are helping?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Of course, Tom. It really makes me think about a lot of things," she replied, not even looking at me. Her indifference began to irritate me. I wanted her to be frank, but instead I only got general answers. At that moment, I realized that I had to find out the truth on my own. The next morning, after our conversation about the camp, I woke up with a strange feeling. Everything that had happened over the past few days kept coming back to me. Melanie looked as calm as ever, but something in her behavior worried me. She seemed to avoid long conversations, as if she was hiding something. The first suspicious detail was a pack of cigarettes that I found that day. The evening was normal. We returned to the cottage after a walk, and she went to take a shower. I stayed to unpack when I saw her. The pack was on the table, half empty. It was strange because Melanie never smoked. She came out of the bathroom, and I immediately showed her the pack. "What is this?" I asked, holding it in my hands. She was surprised, but quickly pulled herself together. "Oh, one of the girls must have left this. We were sitting here in the afternoon, discussing the session. Maybe one of them forgot." Her answer sounded convincing, but something in her tone made me doubt it. I didn't argue, deciding not to push for now. However, from that moment on, I began to look more closely at everything she did. The following days were filled with the usual camp activities. We participated in group activities together, listened to lectures on strengthening relationships, and went for walks. But I noticed that Melanie was disappearing more and more. She attributed it to the extra sessions, which she said were helping her understand herself better. "Tom, you know this is important to both of us," she said one evening when I asked her why she hadn't come to our joint lecture. Her words sounded logical, but I no longer believed her sincerity. Something was not right. One day, when Melanie left for another session, I decided to take a walk around the camp. I wanted to get away for a while and maybe find answers to my questions. After walking a few paths, I came across a small gazebo hidden in the woods. From a distance, I saw Melanie. She was sitting there with Dan. He was the kind of instructor who knew how to attract attention. They were laughing, talking, and it seemed that they had some kind of special closeness. Her face was shining like I hadn't seen in a long time. I stopped at a distance, watching them. It seemed to me that the whole world around me had stopped. She looked happy, much happier than she usually was with me. That night, I could not sleep. Hundreds of questions were running through my head. What had happened? Could it have been just a friendly conversation? Or am I exaggerating? But the pack of cigarettes, its remoteness, and this scene in the gazebo made me think that I was not mistaken. The next day, I decided to look for more evidence. When Melanie left again for another session, I stayed at the cottage and started looking through her things. In her bag, I found notes, short messages that someone had written to her. "Looking forward to seeing you. You're incredible." These words were not random. They were definitely not about me. My doubts turned into confidence. But before making any conclusions, I decided to see everything with my own eyes. The next evening, I followed her. She again said she was going to a meeting in the pavilion. I followed at a distance, hiding behind the trees. But instead of the pavilion, she turned onto a path that led to the same place in the forest. I watched her sit down next to Dan on a bench. Their conversation was warm, their movements too close. At that moment, I had no more doubts. Melanie had betrayed me. The camp that was supposed to be our salvation had now become a place of deception. These thoughts tore me apart from the inside. I went back to our cottage, feeling anger building in my chest. But I didn't want to act on impulse. First, I had to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. One thing I knew for sure, we would never be the same again. That evening, I could feel the tension building inside me. Everything I had seen in the last few days, her aloofness, the notes, the scene in the gazebo, left no room for doubt. Melanie had betrayed me. I could no longer remain silent or hide my pain. This feeling was like a fire that burned my patience to ashes. When she said she was going to another session again, I decided it was time to act. I had no intention of waiting or gathering evidence. I was filled with anger and rage. I followed her to the same place in the forest where they had met before. I saw them near a gazebo. Dan was standing next to her, leaning over to say something. She was laughing, her hand touching his shoulder. It was too much. I couldn't help myself and stepped out of the shade of the trees. "Is this what you call marriage-saving sessions, Melanie?" My voice was so loud that it seemed to be heard even in the camp. Melanie turned sharply, her face pale. Dan jumped back a step, trying to look innocent. "Tom, it's not what you think," she began, but her words sounded as if she didn't believe them herself. I pointed at Dan. "And you expect me to believe that? How long has this been going on?" Weeks? Months? Or maybe years? Dan stepped forward, raising his hands. Friend, let's talk calmly. You've got it all wrong. That was the last straw. My hand balled into a fist, and before I could stop myself, I hit him. The blow was strong, and Dan staggered, falling to the ground. People from the neighboring cottages, who must have heard the noise, started coming out to see what was happening. Melanie rushed over to Dan, trying to help him up. She turned to me with tears in her eyes. You're crazy, Tom. How could you? How could I? You tell me. How could you? I shouted back. My voice was trembling with rage. I could see people around me whispering, but I didn't care. Dan stood up, wiping the blood from his lip. This is none of your business, man. Go and cool off. Cool off? You ruined my marriage. I took another step toward him, but several people in the crowd stopped me. After this incident, I returned to the cottage, leaving Melanie with her instructor. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it was going to jump out of my chest. I sat down on the couch, trying to figure out how I got to this point. Just a few days ago, I believed that our marriage could be saved, but now everything looked completely different. Melanie came back late at night, her eyes red with tears. She started to speak, but I stopped her. No need for explanations, Melanie. I've seen everything I need to see. We're done. She started to sob, saying something about it being a mistake, that she was unhappy, but I wasn't listening anymore. Her words sounded like empty noise. I needed to think, but I already knew it was over. The next day, I decided to stay in the camp. It was a strange decision, but I wanted to feel that I still had control over my life. Staying here, among people who knew nothing about me, seemed better than going home with a sense of defeat. That night, I went to the camp bar. It was a small place with warm lighting and soft music. I ordered a whiskey and sat in the corner, trying not to draw attention to myself. After a while, a woman came into the bar. She looked confident, with a straight posture and a light, friendly expression. She noticed me and suddenly came over to my table. You look like you could use some company, she said, sitting down across from me. Her name was Amanda. She told me that she was going through a difficult time, too. Her marriage ended last year, and she came to the camp to try to start over. Her words were sincere, and I felt I could trust her. We spent the whole evening talking. Her lightness and humor helped me to distract myself. I felt the tension gradually disappear. For the first time in a long time, I laughed. Over the next few days, Amanda and I started spending more time together. We went for walks and talked about everything. Her company reminded me what it was like to be happy. Melanie saw us together and seemed to begin to realize what she had lost. I no longer felt pain or anger. I didn't care what anyone else thought. I knew one thing. I had started a new chapter in my life. And this time it started with honesty and freedom. The following days in the camp were something of a new beginning for me. I was no longer trying to rebuild what had been destroyed. Melanie avoided me, and I avoided her. We became like two strangers who happened to be in the same place. But it didn't bother me anymore. I spent time with Amanda, and it helped me recover. One day, when Amanda and I decided to take a walk in the woods, I felt calmer than I had in months. Her ease of communication, humor, and depth of thought inspired me. She was not only a companion, but also a person who understood the pain and frustration I was going through. We stopped at a lake. The sun was reflected in the water, creating a perfect picture of tranquility. Amanda looked at me and said, "Tom, you look different, more calm." I thought about it. "I guess it's because I'm no longer holding on to what was destroying me," I replied. She smiled. "That's right. Sometimes you have to let go of the old to find the new." Later that evening, the camp organized a campfire. I decided to go along with her. People were singing, joking, and the atmosphere was relaxed. It was something I hadn't felt for a long time. Sincere joy from simple things. But of course Melanie was there. Her eyes were on us almost the entire evening. She was sitting a little to the side, looking distant. At one point, she got up and came over to me. "Tom, can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside with her. Her eyes were full of sadness. "I know I've ruined everything, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to say, I am sorry." Her words were unexpected, but I didn't feel angry. Only calmness. "Melanie, it doesn't matter anymore. What we had between us is over, and I don't want to go back to it." She looked down and then quietly left. It was a moment of final closure for both of us. The next day, I decided to leave the camp. Amanda supported my decision and said we could stay in touch. Our relationship was easy, no strings attached, but it gave me the strength to move on. Before I left, I stopped at the same lake where I had talked to Amanda. The sun was reflected in the water again, and I realized that I was leaving this place with new strength. I was no longer a man who clung to the past. I was now looking forward. When I returned home, I felt a strange peace. It was the first time in a long time that I did not feel the burden of betrayal, anger, or doubt. The camp was a thing of the past, along with a life I didn't want to return to. I knew that my future was now mine alone. Days gradually became weeks, and weeks became months. I focused on myself. I went back to the gym, took up a hobby I had long put off, and even started traveling. But most importantly, I learned to be happy alone. It wasn't an easy path, but every small step brought me pleasure. Amanda remained a part of my life. We kept in touch, and although our relationship did not develop into something serious, it was important. She helped me realize that betrayal and pain do not mean the end of life. They can be the beginning of something new. Once, while looking through old photos, I came across a picture of Melanie. We were standing together on the ocean shore, smiling and happy. It was a moment from when I believed our life was perfect. But now I looked at that photo without pain, only with the realization that everything has its beginning and its end. I didn't hold a grudge against Melanie. Her choices destroyed our marriage, but they also helped me see that I deserve better. People change, and that's okay. Not every story has a happy ending, but every story has a lesson. One day, I met a friend who asked me, "Tom, do you regret what happened?" I thought about it. Regret? No. I learned to value myself. And now I know that betrayal does not define your life. How you react is what really matters. This journey was hard, but it made me stronger. I realized that in life it is important not only to hold on to what was, but also to have the courage to let go. Now I am ready for new challenges, new relationships, and a new life that I will create on my own terms. And when I look in the mirror, I see a person who has experienced betrayal, pain, and loss, but has found himself. And this is the most important thing.